Most people work hard their entire lives and never realize they are following the exact pattern that keeps them stuck, not because they lack effort, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are moving inside a structure they never questioned, and that structure quietly drains everything. You earn, you spend, you restart. Maybe you save a little, but somehow it never compounds. It never becomes something that breathes without you. And the strangest part is, it feels normal. Almost everyone you know is living the same cycle, so it never looks like a problem. But what if the problem isn't how much you earn? What if it's the pattern you're following? Because hidden inside ancient scripture, there is a completely different way wealth was built, a pattern that doesn't rely on luck, a pattern that doesn't collapse under pressure, a pattern that was used long before banks, salaries, or modern finance even existed. And two men understood it better than anyone, Joseph and Solomon. One prepared while the world celebrated, the other multiplied while the world accumulated. And both of them were operating under something most people today have never even heard of: a structure, a sequence, a code. Not a motivational idea, not a financial trick, but a way of thinking that changes how money moves through your life. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: you can work harder than everyone around you and still end up exactly where they are. Not because you failed, but because you followed the same invisible blueprint. So the real question isn't, how do I make more money? It's, what pattern am I unconsciously repeating? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you break it, everything begins to shift. Most people never notice the pattern because it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like life. You wake up, you work, you earn something, and then slowly it disappears. Bills, obligations, small comforts that feel deserved after effort. And by the end of the month, there's just enough left to convince you that you're doing okay, but never enough to change anything. So, you repeat, not because you want to, but because it seemed like the only option. And over time, something subtle happens. You stop expecting progress. You start managing survival. That's the invisible shift, because the system most people live inside was never designed to build wealth. It was designed to maintain motion. Keep working, keep consuming, keep restarting. And the more disciplined you are inside the wrong structure, the more efficiently you stay stuck. That's the part nobody tells you. Hard work inside a broken pattern doesn't fix the pattern. It reinforces it. So people try to escape by doing more of the same. They chase higher income. They wait for the right moment. They believe one big opportunity will finally break the cycle. But the cycle doesn't break from outside. It breaks when the structure changes, because wealth has never been about effort alone. It's about direction. It's about what happens to your resources after they reach you. And this is where most people unknowingly lose everything. Not in what they earn, but in what they do next. They spend first, they save what's left, they react instead of prepare. And that sequence seems harmless until pressure arrives. Because pressure always reveals structure. When something unexpected happens, a crisis, a loss, an opportunity that demands speed, most people freeze. Not because they're incapable, but because they're unprepared. They have no margin. No reserve, no flexibility, and in that moment, they're forced into decisions they would never choose under control, selling at the wrong time, taking on obligations they can't sustain, missing opportunities they can clearly see but cannot reach. That's when it becomes obvious. It was never about how much they had. It was about how it was structured. And here's the uncomfortable realization. Two people can earn the same amount of money, live in the same environment, face the same conditions, and one builds stability, while the other stays trapped, not because one is luckier, but because one is following a different sequence. A sequence most people never question, and that's exactly where everything begins to change. Because the moment you see that the pattern is wrong, you stop blaming the results. While everyone celebrated abundance, Joseph was thinking about what comes after it. That's the part most people miss. Because when life feels good, when money is flowing, when things finally seem stable, the natural instinct is to relax, to enjoy, to assume it will continue. And that's exactly where the pattern begins to break, because Joseph didn't react to the present. He responded to what was coming, not out of fear, but out of clarity. He understood something that most people only realize too late. Good seasons don't last forever, but prepared people do. So while the entire nation was eating freely, spending freely, living as if the flow would never stop, Joseph quietly built reserve, not loudly, not emotionally, silently, grain by grain, year after year. He didn't wait to see if the crisis would come. He prepared as if it already had. And that single decision created a separation that would only become visible later, because at first, nothing looked different. Everyone had enough. Everyone felt secure. Everyone believed they were fine. But then the shift came. The same people who had celebrated without restraint suddenly found themselves without options. The abundance they trusted vanished, and in that moment, something powerful became clear. The difference was never income. It was structure. Joseph had already done what others were trying to do under pressure. He had built during peace what others needed during chaos, and that's what made him untouchable. Because when crisis arrived, he wasn't reacting, he was positioned. While others were desperate, he was stable. While others were searching, he had already secured. And this is where the pattern becomes undeniable. Joseph didn't save randomly. He established a percentage, a fixed portion that was removed before anything else happened. Not after spending, not when convenient. Before, because he understood something most people resist. If saving depends on what's left, nothing is ever left. So he reversed the sequence. He didn't ask, how much can we keep? He decided this part is untouchable, and that decision created order. It trained discipline. It removed emotion. It built consistency. Not once, not occasionally. Every single cycle. That's what changed everything. Because saving wasn't a reaction anymore. It became a system. And systems don't rely on motivation. They run whether you feel like it or not. That's why Joseph's strategy didn't just protect him, it gave him power. Because when the famine came, he didn't just survive it, he controlled it. Nations came to him, resources flowed through him. Influence expanded around him. Not because he chased opportunity, but because he was prepared when opportunity arrived, disguised as crisis. And this is the part that changes how you see everything. Joseph didn't become powerful when things went wrong. He became powerful when things were still going right. That's the hidden move. That's the part most people skip. And that's exactly why most people are forced to react. While a few quietly position themselves long before anything changes, Joseph teaches you how to preserve. Solomon shows you what to do next, because saving alone doesn't create wealth. It creates stability, but not expansion. And this is where most people get stuck. They learn discipline. They start setting something aside. They build a sense of control. But then everything slows down. Nothing multiplies. Nothing accelerates. Nothing scales. Because preservation without structure eventually becomes stagnation. And Solomon understood that completely. He didn't build wealth in one place. He didn't rely on a single stream. He didn't trust one source to carry everything. Instead, he built an ecosystem. Trade routes moving across regions, assets producing over time, partnerships generating constant flow, reserves ready to move when needed, different streams, different speeds, different purposes. So if one slowed down, others kept moving. That's the difference most people never see. They try to build a pile. Solomon built a system. Because a pile sits, a system flows. And wealth doesn't grow where it sits. It grows where it moves with structure. Think about how most people operate. They put everything into one direction. One job, one business, one investment, one bet. And it feels efficient. It feels focused. But in reality, it's fragile, because the moment that single stream is disrupted, everything shakes. Income stops. Pressure rises. Decisions become reactive, not because they were wrong about working hard, but because they were wrong about concentration. Solomon avoided that trap entirely. He distributed his resources intentionally, not randomly, not impulsively, strategically. Some resources were tied to long-term growth. Some generated continuous returns. Some stayed liquid, ready to move at the right moment. That last part is where most people fail. Liquidity doesn't feel powerful. It feels idle. So people eliminate it. They push everything into assets, believing they're maximizing growth. But what they're actually doing is removing flexibility. And without flexibility, you lose timing. You see opportunities, but you can't act. You face pressure, but you can't respond. You're locked in. And that's not wealth. That's exposure. Solomon understood that real power comes from balance between three forces: what grows, what produces, and what moves. Too much in growth and you become rigid. Too much in production and you become dependent. Too much in liquidity and you slowly lose value. But when all three exist together, something different happens. You gain resilience. You gain timing. You gain control. Because now you're not forced into decisions. You choose them. That's the shift. Solomon didn't just multiply wealth, he protected it from collapse while it expanded. And that's why his structure survived conditions that destroyed others. Because when pressure came, he wasn't concentrated. He was diversified across purpose. And here's where it connects back to Joseph. Joseph built the reserve. Solomon built the flow. One secures the future, the other multiplies it. And when those two principles come together, you no longer depend on circumstances. You start shaping them. And this is exactly where most people destroy everything without even realizing it. Not when they fail, not when they lose money, but when things are actually going well. Because success without structure creates a very specific kind of blindness. You start to feel safe. Income is coming in. Opportunities seem endless. Everything appears to be working. So you lean in harder, you commit more, you invest more, you expand faster. And from the outside, it looks like growth. But underneath, something dangerous is forming. Overcommitment. That quiet decision to push everything into one direction because it's working right now. And that's where the pattern breaks. Because when you remove balance, you remove protection. You stop thinking about resilience. You stop thinking about flexibility. You stop thinking about what happens if something shifts. And something always shifts. That's the part people underestimate. Not because they're careless, but because they've never seen how fast stability can disappear when structure is missing. So they build aggressively, multiple properties, business expansion, new obligations, higher fixed costs, everything tied to the assumption that the current flow will continue. And for a while, it does, which makes the illusion stronger. But then something small changes. A delay, a downturn, a disruption no one predicted. And suddenly, everything tightens. Cash flow slows. Expenses remain. Pressure builds. And now, instead of choosing, you're reacting. Selling assets at the wrong time. Taking on debt just to stay afloat. Letting go of opportunities because you don't have room to move. That's when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The problem was never effort. It was allocation. Because when everything is committed, nothing is available. And when nothing is available, you lose control. That's why this mistake is so destructive. It doesn't look like a mistake when you make it. It looks like confidence. It looks like ambition. It looks like progress. But it removes the one thing that actually protects you. Margin. Margin isn't just extra money. It's space. Space to wait. Space to think. Space to act without pressure. And without that space, every decision becomes urgent. And urgent decisions are almost always expensive. That's why people don't just lose money, they lose position. They fall out of timing. They get pushed into situations they would have never chosen if they had room to breathe. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people don't notice this until it's already too late, because overcommitment doesn't feel like risk. It feels like momentum, until momentum turns into weight, and then everything becomes heavy at once. That's the moment where the difference between Joseph and Solomon and everyone else becomes painfully clear. They never allowed themselves to reach that point. They never let success remove structure. They never traded balance for speed. Because they understood something most people only learn through loss. Growth without protection is not growth, it's exposure. And exposure always gets tested. The only question is when. And this is where everything finally connects. Because up to this point, it might still feel like two separate ideas. Joseph, the one who prepares, Solomon, the one who multiplies. But they were never separate. They were two halves of the same structure. And when you see it clearly, it stops being a story. It becomes a law. Joseph teaches preservation. Solomon teaches expansion. Together, they reveal the forgotten law of wealth. Reserve first. Multiply second. Protect always. That sequence is everything, and almost no one follows it. Most people reverse it. They try to multiply first, without reserve. They try to expand. Without protection, they chase growth. Without structure, and when pressure hits, everything collapses. Not because the opportunity was wrong, but because the foundation wasn't there. Joseph understood timing. He knew that what you do during abundance determines what you become during scarcity. So, he built reserve. But if you stop there, you survive. You don't grow. That's where Solomon enters. Solomon understood flow. He knew that what you do with what you have determines how it multiplies over time. So he built structure, different streams, different cycles, different purposes. But here's what most people miss. Both of them were solving the same problem. Uncertainty, Joseph protected against the future. Solomon operated within it. One removes pressure. The other uses movement. And when those two forces come together, something powerful happens. You stop reacting to life, you start positioning inside it, because now you're not depending on one outcome. You have reserve if things go wrong. You have structure if things go right. You're covered on both sides. That's what creates real control. Not control over circumstances, but control over your response to them. And that's where wealth actually begins. Not when you earn more, not when you invest more, but when you stop being vulnerable to every shift. Because think about it. What destroys most people financially isn't lack of opportunity, it's lack of readiness. Opportunities appear, but they require speed. Crises appear, but they require stability. And without both, you lose either way. Joseph gives you stability. Solomon gives you speed. Together, they give you positioning. That's the word, positioning. The ability to act when others hesitate and to remain calm when others panic, that's what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who constantly restart. And once you see this, something inside you shifts, because now it's clear. You were never just missing money. You were missing sequence, the order in which things happen. And sequence is what determines outcome, not effort, not intention, structure. And the moment your structure changes, your entire trajectory begins to change with it. And once you see the sequence, you can't go back to the old way of thinking, because now it's clear. Wealth was never random. It was never about luck. And it was never reserved for a specific group of people. It was always built on patterns. Quiet ones, invisible ones, but powerful enough to shape entire generations. And the difference between those who build something that lasts and those who keep restarting is not income. It's structure. Because money, by itself, doesn't stay. It moves, it leaks, it disappears under pressure if there's nothing holding it in place. That's why some people experience moments of abundance, but never keep it. And others build something that seems almost immovable, not because they are smarter, but because they follow a different pattern. A pattern that doesn't change when emotions change. A pattern that doesn't collapse when circumstances shift. A pattern that continues, even when life becomes unpredictable. And now you've seen it. Reserve first, multiply second, protect always. Simple, but not easy. Because it requires something most people avoid. Consistency, discipline when things feel good, restraint when everything invites excess. Patience when nothing seems to be happening. That's where the real separation happens. Not in moments of crisis, but in ordinary days that look insignificant. Because that's where patterns are built. Quietly, repeatedly, without applause, and over time. Those small decisions stop being small. They compound. They reinforce each other. They create something stable enough to support growth and flexible enough to survive disruption. That's when everything changes, because now you're no longer reacting to life. You're shaping it. You're no longer depending on the next opportunity. You're ready when it arrives. And you're no longer afraid of downturns because you've already built protection before they appear. That's what Joseph did. That's what Solomon mastered. And that's what most people ignore until they're forced to learn it the hard way. But you don't have to wait for that moment, because once the pattern becomes visible, the choice becomes yours. Follow the same cycle or step into a different structure, because in the end, money without pattern disappears. But pattern creates legacy.